Lena Davis stepped into the lobby of a small branch of Davis Financial, a bank she had founded years ago. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. The automatic doors whooshed open as she entered, her sneakers tapping lightly against the ground. As she adjusted her casual cardigan over her shoulders, she wasn't here for anything grand, no urgent business, no meetings with high-profile clients, just a simple withdrawal from her personal account, the kind of transaction anyone might do on any given day. This was Davis Financial, the company Lena had built from the ground up. She had started the bank with the belief that fairness and accessibility were key to providing exceptional service. Over the years, she had steered it through countless challenges, always focused on making sure that customers were treated well. This branch was a key part of her vision. She had personally approved its location, overseen its opening, and even participated in the ribbon-cutting ceremony today. Though she wasn't wearing a tailored suit or high heels, she had no intention of drawing attention to her position. She was here simply as a customer, dressed in a cardigan and sneakers. She approached the counter with a calm, neutral demeanor. She wasn't here to flaunt her title or make anyone treat her differently. She just wanted to make sure that her bank, the one she had built, was as fair as it had always claimed to be. The young teller behind the counter didn't immediately greet her, offering only a quick glance before turning her attention back to the computer screen. Lena cleared her throat, hoping to get her attention. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal," Lena said, her voice calm. The teller, Sophie Matthews, didn't look up, but instead slid a clipboard across the counter. "Please fill this out," she said, without looking at Lena. The form was simple: name, account number, withdrawal amount. Lena filled it out, quickly writing down $5,000. It wasn't a large sum, but it was enough to warrant identification. As Lena slid the form back, she noticed a change in Sophie's demeanor. Her eyes flicked over the form, then to Lena's ID, and then back to the screen. For a moment, Sophie hesitated. There was an uncomfortable shift in the air, something subtle but noticeable. "Could you hold on a second?" Sophie asked, her voice now uncertain. She grabbed Lena's ID and disappeared behind a frosted glass door that led to the back office. Lena stood quietly, her fingers tapping lightly against the marble counter. She had expected to be treated with respect, but this was different. A few minutes later, Sophie returned, but she wasn't alone. Brad Sullivan, the branch manager, followed her out. "Good afternoon, Miss Davis," Brad said with a stiff smile. He looked her over briefly before focusing on the form. "I understand you're making a withdrawal." Lena nodded. "Yes, $5,000 from my account." Brad hesitated. "May I take another look at your ID?" Lena felt a flicker of irritation. "I already gave it to Sophie," she said, her voice steady but firm. Brad didn't acknowledge the comment. Instead, holding the ID up to the light, it was as though he was inspecting it for any signs of falsification. Even though Lena had been a customer at Davis Financial for years, after a pause, Brad asked, "What do you do for work?" "Miss Davis." Lena's jaw tightened at the question. "I run a bank," she replied, her voice now sharper. Brad nodded, slowly glancing at Sophie before asking, "Is this a personal account or a business one?" Lena's patience was running thin. "It's right there on the form," she said, her tone icy. Brad turned the ID over in his hand, still avoiding eye contact. Lena was starting to realize that this wasn't about a mistake or policy, it was about assumptions. Brad Sullivan's fingers lingered over Lena's ID as if he was studying the fine print or waiting for something to stand out. The lobby had grown quieter, the usual hum of activity replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Lena's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of showing her frustration. Sophie stood quietly by, her eyes darting between Brad and Lena. She didn't speak, her posture stiff. The tension was palpable, and Lena could feel it intensifying with every passing second. She had been in situations like this before, times when people questioned her authority or doubted her capabilities, but never like this, not at her own bank. Brad looked back at her, his expression still carefully neutral. "Miss Davis, I'll need to ask you a few more questions before we can proceed with the transaction," he said, his voice smooth, but laced with something that didn't sit well with her. Lena forced herself to stay calm, but the question that followed was more than a little out of place. "And just to clarify, this is your first time banking with us?" Brad asked, his words almost calculated. Lena's stomach tightened at the question. This wasn't a new branch. She had opened it herself. She had signed off on every detail, personally approved the hiring of every employee, and even cut the ribbon at the grand opening. The question wasn't about the withdrawal. It was about something else. "I've banked here since the day this branch opened," Lena replied, her voice unwavering. Brad didn't immediately respond, his eyes flicking to Sophie. Before turning back to Lena, he seemed to be considering her words carefully, as though deciding how to proceed with this unnecessary line of questioning. It wasn't until he spoke again that Lena understood just how far this was going. "And you said you're withdrawing $5,000, Brad said slowly, as though the sum itself needed to be justified. "Can you tell me what you do for work?" Miss Davis. Lena was taken aback by the question. What was the point of this? Was her occupation not clear enough already? She had already told him she worked in finance. She was the CEO of Davis Financial. Did he really need more proof? I run a bank, she repeated, her voice edged with frustration. Now, the same bank you work for? Brad hesitated before asking another question, this time more pointed. What kind of bank? Lena's grip on the counter tightened. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. This wasn't just a routine check, it was an interrogation, and she could feel the subtle undercurrent of judgment in Brad's tone. I'd own this bank, Brad. Lena said, her voice firm. I founded Davis Financial. There was a moment of silence as Brad absorbed the weight of her words. The air felt thick, and Lena could sense a shift in the way he regarded her. He wasn't just asking questions anymore, he was testing her, looking for reasons to deny her request. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked down at the withdrawal slip and back at her, his expression still unreadable. I see, he said slowly, though Lena knew he hadn't really heard her. Is this a personal account or a business account? Lena's patience was hanging by a thread. It's a personal account, she replied, her voice barely controlled now. The form is right there. You can see it. What's the problem? Brad Selfie shifted nervously behind him. But Brad didn't seem to care. He was looking at the form, his fingers tracing the details, as though there was something wrong. But Lena knew he wasn't looking for mistakes. He was looking for a way to make her prove she belonged there. Lena stood still, watching and waiting. She was done with this game. She wasn't going to be treated like a nobody, especially not in her own bank. Lena's patience was fraying. She had come to the branch expecting a simple transaction, expecting to be treated like any other customer. But this wasn't a simple request anymore. This had become a test, and she was beginning to see how far Brad was willing to push her. Brad glanced down at the form again, then back up at Lena. There was a pause, a tension hanging in the air, as if he was trying to figure out his next move. Lena stood her ground, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. So you're withdrawing $5,000 from your personal account, Brad repeated slowly, his eyes scanning her face, as if trying to determine if she would break. Is that correct? Lena nodded, her gaze steady. Yes. You've seen the form. Everything is in order. What's the issue? Brad, he didn't answer right away, instead turning the form over in his hands, as if looking for a hidden flaw. But there was none. There was no reason for this delay, no reason for the extra scrutiny. Lena could feel her frustration building, but she didn't let it show. Finally, Brad looked up at her, his expression shifting slightly. I'm going to need you to verify some additional information before we can proceed with this withdrawal. Lena blinked, confused. Additional information? I've already provided everything. My ID, the form, my account number. What more do you need? Brad seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then he asked the question that pushed Lena to the edge. Can you tell me the amount of your last deposit to this account? Lena's jaw tightened at the question. That wasn't standard procedure. In fact, she knew it wasn't even a common request for large withdrawals. If she had been withdrawing a substantial sum, perhaps a secondary verification would have made sense, but not for $5,000, not for a customer who had been with the bank since its opening. I don't have that number memorized, Lena said, trying to stay calm. But you have my account number. You can pull up the information like you would for anyone else. Brad didn't seem to hear her. He simply nodded like he was processing her words, but his eyes remained calculating, as if searching for a way to make her prove she had access to her own money. Lena felt the weight of the moment, the uncomfortable silence pressing in around them. We take security very seriously, Brad said after a beat, almost as